Chapter 5. The Inquest. Like the great detective Power, Dr. Lewis Johnston Lovett cut a dashing, if slightly more earthbound, figure. Lovett was resplendent in his foul-weather costume of high celluloid collar, rakish business suit, pince-nez, and full-length fur coat, unquestionably a man of breeding and refinement. His dignified countenance seemed at odds with the unkempt masses inhabiting the shores of Bear River, lumbermen, crofters, dorymen, and rovers whose notion of business attire extended only as far as dungarees and rain slickers. Lovett was a dandy among drones, highly educated in a land where the academy took a backseat to apprenticeships and sons following in their father's seafaring footsteps. Yet for all his lofty ways, Lovett was a man of the people. He was a true maritimer by virtue of birth and temperament. Born on August 28, 1867, Lovett was raised in Kentville, one of countless villages vying for the title of the heart of the Annapolis Valley. The son of Henry Lovett and Ann Johnston, young Lewis was a dutiful son and model student. He matriculated first at Acadia University in neighboring Wolfville, then made quick work of New York University's prestigious School of Medicine. Upon graduation, Lovett returned to the valley intent on setting up practice in Bear River. Those who questioned his choice of location soon learned he was simply following his heart. Lovett had fallen hard for a local girl, Josephine Marshall. By the fall of 1896, the couple were engaged to be married. Josephine was the favored daughter of a respected family and every bit Lovett's intellectual equal. She fancied herself a big game hunter, a crack shot who had proven her mettle time and again tracking moose and bear through the steep hills of her native land. Indeed, it was their mutual love of hunting that first brought Lewis and Josephine together. They were a handsome couple, well suited to each other and destined for great things. There was only one problem. Bear River already had a beloved town doctor. Robert J. Ellison, M.D., was 35 years Lovett's senior and an elder statesman of the medical profession, who had faithfully served Bear River and its occupants for decades. Although he was getting on in years, Ellison had no immediate plans to retire and no intention of relinquishing his stranglehold on the welfare of the town. If Lovett felt the town needed another physician, Dr. Ellison was not inclined to agree. Still, for all Ellison's reticence, the two doctors developed a grudging respect, which eventually grew into a friendship that endured until Ellison's death on February 13, 1907. In 1896, however, the uneasy truce between the two medical men was tenuous at best, forged of little more than feigned professional courtesy. To house his new wife and budding practice, Lovett built a striking empire-style home on a particularly scenic slope overlooking the river. Actually, it was his future father-in-law, Alpheus Marshall, a prominent village merchant, who built the house, but Lovett bought it at a favorable rate and claimed it as his own. Lewis stocked his ground-floor surgery with the latest in medical accoutrements, hung out a shingle, and waited. The response was immediate and positive. Sprier than his competitor, Lewis soon found himself in constant demand. The image of Lovett atop a horse-drawn sleigh, battling his way through the debilitating winter snows to aid his outlying patients became a permanent fixture of village life. In short order, there was a discernible spike in the number of children christened Lewis or Lovett, in homage to the man who had braved the elements to shepherd them into the world. Lovett's glory days were legion and legendary, but on January 28, 1896, as Annie Kempton's body lay cooling on her father's sitting room floor, Lovett's polished facade barely concealed the timid novice lurking beneath. Lewis was still wet behind the ears and struggling to find his footing. He was well educated and brilliant, but such qualities were no substitute for real-world experience. Lovett's high-priced education had not prepared him for the task now at hand, to convene a formal inquiry into the death of Bear River's beloved daughter, Annie Kempton. Lovett's legal mandate stemmed from his first official appointment to public office, that of county coroner. There would be other, more prestigious posts in his future, including serving 1,423 days as a Liberal Party member in the Canadian House of Commons, but for the moment, Lovett's role as coroner was the pinnacle of his nascent career. The timing of Lovett's appointment proved unfortunate and left him balancing precariously on the cusp of a fundamental shift in the paradigm of medico-legal death investigation. Less than 1 year prior, Dr. William D. Finn had been appointed as the province's first medical examiner for Halifax and Dartmouth. Finn's tenure would be a chronicle of the region's darkest hours. He oversaw mortuary operations for victims of the Titanic and the 1917 Halifax explosion, and necessity being the true mother of invention, he pioneered revolutionary methods still in use today for dealing with mass casualties. Finn's arrival heralded the beginning of the end for the coroner system in Nova Scotia. Originating from the 1194 Articles of Eyre, a precursor of British common law, the position of coroner arose from Article 20, which empowered its holder to keep the pleas of the Crown. From this nebulous and all-encompassing mandate, the duties of the coroner grew to include the keeping of the rolls, an early form of birth and death registration, and the investigation of all sudden deaths. While historians agree that the earliest coroners were not particularly concerned about discovering the culprit in a homicide, focused as they were on record-keeping and taxation, later appointees expanded the scope of their authority to include the powers of subpoena, bail, and arrest in criminal proceedings. Such unchecked power grab soon derailed the wheels of justice. Coroners were not doctors or lawyers, nor did they receive any specialized training. The right political connections sufficed to hold the position. That these unregulated benighted overseers had the power to pronounce guilt, only to then tax the accused without recourse, created a system rife with abuse and injustice. As the separate but symbiotic spheres of jurisprudence and policing advanced, the purview of coroners to adjudicate criminal matters was sharply curtailed. The final step in the system's evolution was the introduction of medical examiners, licensed physicians specifically trained to evaluate suspicious or violent deaths. Unlike their coroner brethren, medical examiners fulfilled only two prescribed functions: to offer a medical opinion as to the cause and manner of death and the issuance of death certificates. Questions of culpability, criminality, or the Crown's right to compensation were entirely outside their scope. It was into this rapidly changing New World Order that the untested Dr. Lovett stepped headfirst and guileless, oblivious to the pitfalls that lay ahead. He stepped headfirst and guileless, oblivious to the pitfalls that lay ahead. He possessed the qualifications of a medical examiner but the title of coroner. As for the actual parameters of his duties at that moment, no one could say for certain. Indeed, the exact powers of a coroner in Nova Scotia had never been set down in law, and the jurisdictional authority of a medical examiner would not be codified by legislation for more than 6 decades. Lovett was working blind in uncharted territory, untethered by statutes and unguided by experience. However murky the waters he found himself in, Dr. Lewis Lovett had a pressing yet grim function to perform. Lovett, suspecting that the proceedings would be standing room only, elected to hold his inquest in the Oakdean Academy, a recently constructed schoolhouse and town hall that came with the then exorbitant price tag of $8,000. Rising like a tombstone out of the valley floor, the academy was the town center in more than just the geographic sense. Word of the inquest spread through the village like tentacles of kudzu, and as Lovett called the hearing to order at precisely 2 p.m. on Tuesday, January 28, it seemed as if every resident of Bear River stood at the ready, awaiting their chance to be heard. Inquests carry the full force of law but are not technically trials, merely fact-finding missions. As no one stands accused of a crime, there is no need for defense counsel and no judge to oversee the proceeding, although the coroner fills that role for all intents and purposes. There is a jury, sworn and impaneled, to hear the evidence and render a verdict. As murder is a crime against the state, the interests of the Crown are represented by a prosecutor. When it came time to address the Queen's matter touching the death of Annie Kempton, the region's lead Crown attorney, Mr. A.J. Cobb, was unavailable. In his stead, his alternate Mr. J. M. Owen presided. Lovett, new to both the town and the role of coroner, saw the proceedings as an opportunity to establish himself in the community. He ran the hearing with a quiet dignity and firm hand, demanding courtesy and decorum from the excited crowd and returning them in kind. Yet Lovett's calm demeanor masked some deep-seated insecurities. News of Annie's death had come only hours before. With no detective as yet on scene and the autopsy still not underway, Lovett was unmoored and forced to cast a wide net. The doctor had yet to formulate a plan, although the crowd could not tell to look at him. Driven by instinct if not expertise, Lovett decided the right course of action was to begin by questioning those who lived closest to the Kempton house: Tilly Camo and her older children, Hattie and Herbert, who lived just down the road, and their lodger, Peter Wheeler, who had found the body. Tilly's youngest child Walter was also sworn and told a chilling tale. Just days before the murder, as Annie worked alone in the kitchen preparing her midday meal, she looked up to see a strange man standing on the kitchen step, staring at her through the window. As their eyes met, he turned and ran. Annie told Walter that she did not recognize the man, but the incident had frightened her enough to tell others. Clearly, someone with questionable intent had discovered Annie was often home alone. With his tentative witness list compiled and an auditorium packed to the rafters with townsfolk anxious to testify, Lovett gavelled his inaugural inquest to order. The first to take the stand was Peter D. Wheeler,